The ridgeline looks harmless from a distance, just a pale spine of wind-carved snow curling over black stone. Up close, it's a knife edge, the kind that makes every step sound louder than it should, the kind that tells you the mountain has been here longer than any war and will stay long after. The platoon element crests it in a stagger, breath turning to crystals in the bright cold, sunlight turning the basin below into a sheet of glare so intense it feels like staring into a welding arc. They drop in anyway, because the mission says the basin is the fastest corridor to the pass, and the pass is the only way to reach the relay site before the afternoon winds make the extraction impossible. They move like they always move, disciplined spacing, rifles up, eyes working, boots finding purchase on crusted snow that crackles underweight. The first shots come so clean they sound almost polite. Crack, crack, crack. Not the wild popping of scared men. Not the ragged stutter of a panicked trigger. This is measured, spaced, and confident. The rounds snap overhead with that thin, insect whine of supersonic steel, close enough that the air itself seems to flinch. Snow puffs off an iceberm a foot from the lead team's faces. A second later, a burst from the right rakes the slope and forces everyone down. Down! Down! Someone shouts, but the sound is swallowed by the wind and the basin's wide, empty bowl. They slam behind knee-high ice berms that feel laughably small in the open. The berms are just hardened drifts, pressed into ridges by weeks of wind. They offer cover the way a sheet of cardboard offers cover. Barely. Men dig elbows into snow, flatten bodies, try to make themselves smaller than physics allows. A belt-fed gun opens up from a rock shelf high to the left, its heavy thump-thump-thump chewing a horizontal line through the snowfield. The gunner isn't spraying. He's cutting, drawing a bright, lethal seam that turns the open corridor into a no-man's strip. Any attempt to cross it would be a sprint through a sawmill. The radios sputter. At first it's just a hiss, as if a storm has crept into the circuits. Then the hiss becomes a rising, electronic whine that crawls up the spine. Voices distort into broken syllables. Someone tries again, thumb jamming the push-to-talk. Sunray. Sunray. This is nothing but warbling static. The whine climbs, then abruptly flattens into dead air. The link is gone. The satellite burst that should have been their lifeline is useless. Even the short-range chatter is mangled like someone is twisting it with a hand. Hand signals start. Sharp, urgent motions in bright glare that washes out gloves and gestures until meaning gets lost. A fist means stop. A slice means move. A sweep means flank. But when adrenaline hits and the world narrows, hands become frantic, and frantic signals become guesses. On the far side of the basin, enemy fighters appear as dark flecks moving between rocks, using the snow's brightness like camouflage in reverse. Your eye wants to stare into the light, and the shadows become blind spots. They are positioned with intent, one element high, one mid, one low, forming a triangle that can funnel anything that moves. A breacher, big shoulders, heavy pack, tries to shift position to cover a teammate. He lifts his knee, takes one step, and a round punches into his thigh. He drops hard, face in snow, a sound ripping out of him that he doesn't have time to be ashamed of. Blood pours dark and startling against white, then steams as it hits the cold. Every second becomes a leak they can't afford. Tourniquet, a corpsman yells, and crawls forward, hands already digging for straps. The team leader tries to reach out to the air asset to confirm the extraction bird is still on schedule, still coming to the LZ before the wind turns savage. Viper, confirm pickup. The only response is that faint, hateful electronic whine in his headset, like a mosquito you can't kill. Enemy fire shifts. They start walking it inward, not to finish quickly, but to herd, bursts that stitch the snow closer and closer to the ice berms, nudging the seals toward a shallow ravine on the basin's left side. From where the team lies pinned, the ravine looks like relief, a place to drop into and move unseen. But it's too obvious. A funnel dressed up as an exit. An RPG whoosh slams into the basin behind them, detonating with a heavy, concussive thump that punches breath out of lungs. Shrapnel hisses through snow. A second operator takes fragments, helmet ringing, eyes unfocused. He tries to sit up, then drops back down like a puppet whose strings got cut. The unit's tempo breaks. The calm machine becomes a wounded animal. And then, between bursts, in the brief silence where everyone is swallowing fear, an enemy RPG gunner drops mid-step. No explosion. No obvious impact. One moment is moving, weapon on his shoulder, and the next is folded to the ground as if the earth hooked his ankle. His launcher clatters against rock, absurdly loud. A beat later, a radio man on a ridge, one of the dark flecks moving with purpose, jerks backward and collapses, hands clawing at nothing. Then a squad lead who is shouting and waving his men forward spins and crumples. The cadence is too deliberate to be luck. Too spaced, too precise. 3 shots, 3 bodies, 3 functions removed. The attackers hesitate. You can feel it, even from the basin. Their fire stutters, not because they are out of ammo, but because their brains are trying to solve a new problem. Heads turn. Rifles sweep. They scan the ridge lines and rock shells where a shooter should be. But the shots are coming from an angle that shouldn't exist. There is no muzzle flash, no silhouette, no obvious perch. Down in the basin, pinned behind ice, the SEALs don't know who is firing. They don't know if it's another element they didn't expect, a ghost team, a miracle. They only know that someone, somewhere, has started buying them oxygen with every controlled press of a trigger. Someone is changing the math. And as the camera of the mind pulls back over that bright, empty snowfield, it's the emptiness that feels threatening. A pristine basin, sunlight, wind, and a sudden pattern of precision that leaves dark shapes in the snow like punctuation marks. Hours earlier, the cold weather staging hut had smelled like fuel, metal, and wet wool. Frost clung to weapon cases and the edges of maps. Outside the narrow window, the mountains glowed blue-white under a hard daytime sky, as if the world had been bleached clean. Gear was laid out in rows with a ritual's discipline: mags, medkits, optics, batteries, breaching tools, each piece accounted for like a prayer bead. Men moved through the space with the relaxed swagger of professionals who have done this too many times to believe they can die today. Jokes were traded in low voices, the kind that keep fear at bay by pretending it isn't invited. At the center of that controlled chaos stood the commander. Lieutenant Mara Kincaid didn't fill a room the way loud people did. She filled it the way cold fills a gap, quietly, completely. She spoke when necessary and not a syllable more. She didn't posture. She didn't perform. She checked straps and buckles without announcing she was doing it, fingers moving with economical certainty, eyes scanning for small failures that become big ones later. A teammate's radio harness sat slightly twisted. She fixed it. Another man's glove had a tear. She handed him tape without comment. She moved along the line like an invisible hand correcting mistakes. Some of the men respected the silence. Others read it as weakness. New boss doesn't say much. One operator muttered as he slid a magazine into his pouch. Maybe she's saving word for when she needs him, another replied. But there was a grin that said he didn't mean it kindly. A third, older, with a beard grown for warmth, leaned back and said, "Quiet ain't the issue. It's, you know." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The room understood anyway. It wasn't about competence on paper. It was about what the habits wanted to believe. Mara didn't react. If she heard, she didn't show it. Her face stayed calm, eyes steady, as if the comments were wind noise. The brief was tight and clean. A covert relay and sensor node tucked above the mountain pass. Not a big installation. Small, hidden, the kind you'd miss unless you knew what to look for. A hostile cell had been using it to monitor coalition movement through the corridor. With the relay, they could anticipate convoys, ambush resupply, track patrol patterns. With the sensor array, they could get warning of aircraft and ground teams long before anyone else. The mission was to reckon it, confirm signatures, and disable it, quietly if possible, before the next rotation moved through the pass. No prolonged engagement. No hero moves. In and out. Extraction had one window. A single helicopter pickup at a marked LZ before the afternoon winds rose off the ridge and turned flight into roulette. Miss it, and they'd be stuck overnight with temperatures dropping and enemy eyes adjusting to the idea of a prize. The comms plan was standard but vulnerable: a satellite burst to reach higher, a fallback line-of-sight relay to the LZ, both dependent on electronics and open air. The mountains didn't care about plans. Neither did anyone with a jammer. Mara traced the route with a gloved finger on the map. "The basin approach forces us into a predictable corridor," she said, voice low but firm. "Hard crust. Our movement will be loud. If they've got Overwatch, they'll hear us before we see them." The ops chief, experienced, broad-shouldered, confident, glanced at her and shrugged. "We move fast. We don't get fixed. We're in daylight. We're clean." He tapped the basin route. "Shortest line." Someone behind Mara breathed out a soft laugh. "Overthinking," a voice muttered. Mara let it pass. Words were cheap. Preparation wasn't. She made adjustments that looked small until they mattered. She shifted extra mags into a pouch she could reach with either hand. She packed a compact range card, laminated, already scribbled with likely distances based on terrain. She taped a spare optic battery inside her glove cuff, close enough to swap without digging through layers. She checked her rifle's glass twice, then a third time, and marked a tiny reference point near the mount, a quick alignment indicator if something got knocked. She studied contour lines longer than most, not because she couldn't read them, but because she could see what they implied. She found a dead angle on the far ridge, an exposed, steep line of rock and snow that most would dismiss as unreachable under fire. An impossible position. Her left wrist flexed as she adjusted her sling. A flicker of pain crossed her face so fast it could have been imagined. Under her sleeve, a scar pulled tight when she moved. Old injury. Old lesson. On infill, the world was bright and brittle. Daytime snowfield. When pushing fine powder across crust like smoke. The team moved in staggered spacing, heads down, rifles angled, breath controlled. Their footprints were dark ovals in the glare, a breadcrumb trail they couldn't erase. Near a rock outcrop, Mara saw something that didn't belong, a faint unnatural line in the snow, like dragged cables or shallow trench where something had been pulled and recovered. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, the kind of detail that only matters if you let it. She stopped for half a second, eyes narrowing. The team kept moving. The corridor was dictating their tempo. She filed the detail away like a knife slipped into a boot. As the basin opened below and the ridgeline dropped behind them, Mara's gaze lingered on the high ground. Not with anxiety, more like calculation, as if she was already planning a correction to a plan that would fail, because plans always fail the first time they touch reality. Then reality hit them in the face at supersonic speed. Back in the basin, the first burst cut their spacing. The enemy had rehearsed lanes, angles that overlapped, forcing the SEALs into pockets of cover that were not cover at all. It wasn't random contact. It was geometry. Comms collapsed fully. The jamming wasn't subtle anymore. Even short-range chatter distorted, voices breaking apart into metallic fragments. People shouted instead, and shouting in a gunfight is like trying to stitch a wound with trembling hands. It's better than nothing. It's still not enough. The terrain disadvantage became obvious. They were low, trapped in the basin's bowl, while the enemy owned ridges and shelves. Every time a SEAL lifted his head to scan, the glare punished him. Spindrift swept through in sheets, fine powder blown by gusts that turned shapes into smears. Sunlight bounced off the snow and made optics bloom with white haze. Ammo started vanishing. Suppressive fire had to be heavy just to keep heads down. Mag after mag clicked empty faster than anyone wanted to admit. The belt-fed enemy gun was patient, making each burst count. It wasn't wasteful. It was professional. The breach's thigh wound worsened. Tourniquet tightened, but blood still found ways to seep, warm and stubborn. The concussed operator moved like he was underwater, slow and wrong, dragging the unit's mobility like an anchor. And the enemy didn't rush in to finish. That was the part that made the hair on Mara's neck rise. They shaped the fight, adjusted, walked fire inward like shepherds with rifles. They weren't hunting for kills. They were herding the SEALs toward that ravine funnel. They wanted them there. A distant mechanical thump echoed off the basin walls. Not a rifle. Not a grenade. Something heavier. Mortar tubes or a launcher bracketing the basin. Rounds landing to block escape routes. Not directly on the seals yet. Like a fence being built while the animal is still inside. Mara crawled to a better sight line. Stomach pressed into snow. Rifle pulled tight. Eyes slitted against glare. She listened through the dead radio for any hint and got nothing but that faint electronic whine. Directional. Close. Not some far-off jammer. This was nearby, line of sight, meant to isolate them like a surgeon cutting nerves. She spotted a hostile moving between rocks with purpose, head angled down like he was checking a device. A signal tech. A radio operator. Someone carrying the brain of the ambush. She saw two RPG men repositioning, angling themselves toward the ravine mouth like they were setting up a kill shot for anyone who tried to run that way. She tried to push a plan with hand signals. Split, bound, take the shelf, break the gun's angle. Her motions were sharp, practiced. The team leader saw them and hesitated. Not because the plan was bad, but because a part of him still treated her as support, not command. A fraction of doubt, a second of delay, and in a fight like this, seconds were blood. Nemes cracked the edge of her optic lens. Not shattered, but spited at the corner. While the mount took a strike and shifted. The view through her glass gained a subtle distortion. Like the world had been bent a degree. Minor. Consequential. The kind of failure that makes a clean shot turn into a miss at the wrong time. The constraint stack hit its peak like a wave slamming into rocks. Comms jammed, movement pinned, wounded teammates, visibility degrading, ammo burning, extraction clock ticking, and the enemy shaping them toward a funnel. Mara made a decision that looked like abandonment if you didn't understand geometry. She didn't argue, didn't shout. She slid backward, low, using bursts of enemy fire as cover, then slipped into a shallow ice cut where the snow had caved into a narrow trough. The world above kept exploding. Down inside the cut, there was momentary quiet, distant gunfire muffled, wind brushing powder along the edges like sand in a desert. She moved alone. The snow crust betrayed her with faint crunches when she climbed out of the cut. She timed her steps with gusts, with a belt-fed's heavy thump, with the crack of rifles. Noise-covered noise. She kept her body low, shoulders tight, rifle hugged close, the sling biting into her jacket. Terrain here wasn't a gentle slope. It was wind-sculpted drifts and rock teeth, a narrow spine that offered low profile but high exposure. If she stood, she'd silhouette against sky and glare. If she stayed low, she'd crawl like an insect across a dinner plate. She adjusted her optic using the tiny reference mark she'd made earlier, fingers working fast despite cold. The knock had shifted something. She couldn't fix it perfectly. She could make it functional. She checked her holds mentally, recalibrating without the luxury of a calm range. Pain flared in her forearm when she pulled herself over a rock lip. The old injury woke up like a sleeping dog. Her hand trembled for a fraction of a second, and she forced it still with breathing, with muscle memory. Fear wasn't allowed to sit at the controls. Function was. Halfway up the spine, she found it again, the faint cable track she'd noticed earlier, now clearer from this angle. A shallow groove where something had been dragged and recovered. It ran along the ridge's contour, disappearing behind a cluster of rocks. Jammer. Power. Control. She followed it like a breadcrumb trail. Then she saw a small shack near the relay line. Wood and corrugated metal, half buried in drift, paint scabbed off by weather. It could be civilian maintenance. It could be coerced locals. It could be a hiding place. In any other environment, she might have assumed hostile and fired. In snow-bright daylight with a wall built on mistakes, assumption was a luxury that killed innocence. She held. Watched. A man moved near it, dark clothing, rifle slung, posture alert. Not civilian. Another man stepped out carrying something boxy, antenna protruding. The whine in her dead headset suddenly made sense. The shack wasn't home. It was cover for a device. Mara slid into position behind a rock fin that split the wind. From here, she could see into the enemy's control points. The belt-fed shelf, the RPG pair, the signal tech moving with purposeful calm, and, near the shack, The jammer operator paired with a spotter. Two riflemen guarded them, eyes scanning the basin like hawks. Time pressure clawed at her thoughts. The sun angle was shifting. Wind gusts grew stronger with each minute. The extraction window was bleeding out somewhere behind the mountains, indifferent to heroics. She tested distance using a known reference. The height of a rock face, the width of a shoulder, the length of a rifle. She built a quick holdover estimate, folded into muscle memory. The optic distortion meant she couldn't be arrogant. She had to be honest. Honest shots. Clean outcomes. Below, the basin fight continued. Chaos, yelling, wounded breathing hard, magazines clacking, snow exploding into dust. Up here, the world narrowed to breath and pressure and the tiny, intimate movement of her trigger finger taking up slack. A scout with binos swept the far ridge. The enemy had begun to suspect another shooter existed. They didn't know where. Suspicion is an enemy of patience. It makes men move. Moving men make mistakes. Mara waited for the right mistake. She built the target ladder in her head, not as a list of bodies, but as a list of functions. Force multipliers first. Brains and tools. The men who made other men dangerous. Her first shot took the radio operator coordinating the ambush lanes. It wasn't dramatic, just a crisp crack and a man folding, his device tumbling into snow. Immediately, the rhythm of enemy fire stuttered. Overlapping lanes lost their timing. Shouts rose, uncertain and angry. Her second shot dropped the lead RPG gunner setting up the ravine funnel. He had the tube on his shoulder, head turned toward the basin, ready to seal the trap. Mara waited for the moment his body aligned cleanly and sent him down before he could fire. The launcher slipped from his hands and landed in snow like a discarded limb. Her third shot went to the belt-fed gunner on the rock shelf. She didn't shoot the weapon. She shot the man behind it. When he dropped, the gun's thump-thump stopped mid-burst, and the basin's no-man's strip suddenly became just snow again. A corridor reappeared where none existed. The turning point was the fourth shot. The jammer operator leaned over his device, posture relaxed, confident in the invisibility his electronic wall gave him. Mara threaded the angle through rock and glare, compensating for optic distortion with pure discipline. She pressed through the trigger wall. Crack! The operator crumpled. The device toppled. The faint electronic whine in her headset died as if someone had cut a wire. Down in the basin, radios crackled back to life mid-chaos. Voices burst through like rescued air. Repeat. Say again. Comms. Comms up. We've got. Who the hell? Mara keyed her MIC. Voice calm. Low. Precise. Break contact left. Use the shelf's dead lane. Drag wounded first. I've got Overwatch. Her authority wasn't in volume. It was in clarity. In the fact that her words matched reality again. Targets 4 through 6 came fast but not rushed. Two flankers shifting to cover the new corridor, and a spotter directing mortar bracketing with hand signals. She removed the eyes and the angles. Each shot had a purpose, each purpose widened the corridor. In the basin, the team leader snapped into motion now that comms existed again. He didn't hesitate. Bound to move. Smoke on my mark. Casualty first. Two operators hooked arms under the wounded breacher and hauled him, boots slipping, body straining, breath hard. Another man grabbed the concussed teammate by his harness and yanked him into motion. Suppressive fire became controlled, not frantic. The unit's machine restarted. Mara dropped a squad leader trying to rally a push. He was shouting, waving, building momentum. One shot took the momentum spine. The enemy surge collapsed into hesitation, men looking around, waiting for orders that would never arrive. That hesitation lasted only a heartbeat, because the enemy was competent. They adapted. A small drone lifted from behind rocks, a dark insect against bright sky, camera eye searching for the shooter. On another ridge, two climbers began moving, trackers, likely, using rock and drift to approach Mara's line from an oblique angle. The enemy wasn't just panicking. They were counter-hunting. Mara shifted inches at a time, micro-scoots behind the rock fin, sliding to a second perch she'd already identified. The predictable sniper stays put trap would get her killed. She moved like water, quiet, deliberate, never lifting high enough to silhouette. Target 8 was the drone handler, eyes on a tablet, antenna in hand, posture focused on the screen, not the mountain. Crack! The drone wobbled, drifted, then dropped into a drift like a dead bird. Target 9 was a second RPG carrier moving to replace the first. Crack! He spun and fell, his weapon useless. Target 10 was a rifleman guarding the high ground route that the SEALs needed to reach the safer corridor. Crack! The route opened, not because the enemy vanished, but because the enemy's control over it did. Her barrel heated. She felt it through gloves, a subtle change in the rifle's behavior. Her breathing tightened. Cold air burned. Her magazine count dropped. She slowed, not because she was tired, but because certainty mattered more than speed. It had to be clean. The enemy tried heavier weapons. A mortar lead or launcher caller shifted fire onto Mara's ridge. Snow erupted around her, rocks chipping, fragments singing past. The mountain itself seemed to flinch. She was no longer the invisible hand shaping the fight. She was the hunted. She watched the pattern. Mortars aren't magic. They have rhythm. The caller has to see, to adjust. She found him, standing slightly apart, posture commanding, eyes flicking between impact points and his men. Target 11, the heavy weapon caller. Crack! The pattern broke. Incoming rounds became erratic, falling wide, less useful, more angry than effective. The final piece, the one that shattered cohesion, was the cell commander. He moved with purpose, not like a fighter, but like a man who believed his plan deserved to work. He carried himself differently. He had a radio that wasn't working now, a sidearm, and the kind of controlled anger that makes leaders take risks. He was moving to personally solve the sniper problem, because competent enemies don't tolerate mystery. Mara waited until he stepped into a slice of open snow. One moment, one angle, one line that she could take without doubt. Crack! He dropped as if the mountain itself had decided the argument was over. Below, the enemy's cohesion shattered. Fire became scattered. Shouts turned into questions. Men who had been moving with the confidence of a plan began to move with the fear of randomness. They retreated, not in full rout, but in a broken withdrawal, each man suddenly responsible for his own survival instead of a shared objective. With comms restored, the SEALs coordinated smoke and movement. A gray-white cloud bloomed, blending with spindrift, masking their bound. They pushed toward the corridor that had been impossible minutes earlier. They hauled wounded, covered angles, moved as a unit again. Mara moved too, not toward them, toward a safer line that kept her above, watching the enemy's last attempts to regroup. The climbers who'd been counter-hunting froze, uncertain whether advancing was bravery or suicide. She didn't waste rounds on men who no longer had function. She saved what she had for what mattered. The helicopter came in low over the ridge, rotor wash blasting snow into spirals. The LZ was a marked patch of wind-scoured ground beyond the basin, just as the brief had promised. The pilot fought Gus, landing skids kissing frozen earth like a controlled crash. The afternoon wind had begun to rise, late enough to be survivable, early enough to be a warning. The SEALs piled in with practiced urgency. Casualty first, then security, then gear. The breacher's face was pale, but he was alive. The concussed operator blinked like he'd woken from a bad dream. Mara climbed in last, rifle still up, eyes still scanning the white world as if it might betray them again. As the helicopter lifted, the basin fell away beneath them. Bright snow, dark rocks, scattered bodies that looked small and unreal from above. The enemy's trap remained as a shape in the landscape, a lesson etched into light. Back at the forward sight, the adrenaline came off in stages. Hands shook when they finally had permission. Voices got quieter, not because they were tired, but because the mind doesn't like revisiting how close it came to the edge. In the debrief room, the air was warmer, but the cold stayed in their bones. A screen showed helmet cam footage. The basin, the ice berms, the moments when the world collapsed into gunfire and static. Overwatch angles were mapped on a board, lines drawn from ridges to basin, triangles of fire, the funnel of the ravine. Then someone overlaid a new line, a thin marker from the far ridge, that impossible position. The line cut through the basin like a scalpel. It explained everything. Why the shots had felt like they came from nowhere. Why the enemy had hesitated. Why the kill box had broken. The ops chief stayed at the map longer than anyone else. The doubt he'd worn earlier didn't fit in anymore. They pulled captured fragments from the fight, pieces of the jammer, the improvised antenna, storage devices scavenged from the relay equipment. Techs plugged them in, read what they could, and the enemy motive became clear in a way that made everyone in the room go quiet. The relay site wasn't just for watching. It was part of a wider corridor network, sensors, cameras, and data links feeding ambushes and propaganda. The plan had been to isolate a SEAL element with a directional jammer, herd them into the ravine funnel, and film the finish. Not just to kill, to broadcast, to prove dominance, to make the mountain pass their stage. The jammer's purpose had been explicit: cut the unit off from higher command, kill coordination, force panic, turn professionals into trapped targets. Control, not chaos. A competent enemy's kind of cruelty. When the footage reached the moment near the shack, someone paused it. The small structure half buried in drift looked innocuous on screen, almost like a civilian hut. Mara's reticle hovered near it for a second, then shifted away to confirm movement and weapon posture before she fired. "You held," the team leader said quietly, not a question. "It wasn't a home," Mara replied. "But I didn't know that until I knew it." The room understood the sentence beneath the sentence. In war, being sure is a luxury. She had chosen to buy certainty with seconds, even while her team bled in the basin. That choice could have cost them. It also could have saved someone who didn't deserve to die. Later, when the room thinned and the adrenaline had nowhere to hide, the team leader approached her without an audience. He held a patch marker from the operation, one the unit gave each other after hard missions, a small symbol that meant you belonged. He didn't make a speech. He didn't wrap it in humor. He just held it out. "I didn't listen," he said. "On the ridge. I saw your signals." His jaw tightened. "You saved us anyway." Mara took the marker and nodded once. The apology didn't need more words than that. Respect, in their world, wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned in the space between fear and function. When the room was empty again, Mara sat alone for a moment and flexed her left hand. Pain flared under the sleeve, a ghost of another day. The scar wasn't from the cold. It was from a different mission, years ago, in a different place, when she had rushed a shot because she'd wanted to prove she could, and the round had taken more than it was meant to. Collateral, a scream that didn't belong to the enemy, a lesson that had burned itself into her bones. She carried that lesson like weight. It was why she was quiet. Not because she lacked confidence, but because she didn't waste words pretending certainty was easy. Outside, daylight still owned the snow. The sky was a clean blue, the kind that makes violence feel like a lie. Mara stepped out into the bright cold and walked a few paces away from the building. The wind touched her face and tugged at her jacket like a hand trying to pull her back into the mountain. She looked out toward the ridges where the fight had happened, toward the basin that had tried to swallow her unit whole. From here, it looked peaceful again, as if the mountain had erased the gunfire the moment it ended. She exhaled, and her breath vanished. Behind her, her boots left prints in the snow, dark ovals in the glare. The wind rose and began to blur their edges almost immediately, brushing powder over them like time-covering evidence. In the end, that was how it always was. The work got done. The noise faded. The mountain stayed. And the proof, real proof, wasn't the story anyone would tell later, or the numbers someone would repeat like legend. It was a quiet fact that when everything broke, comms, plans, bodies, confidence, she had stayed functional anyway. The wind erased her footprints as she stood there, alone for a moment in the bright cold. And the last thing she let herself think was simple enough to feel like truth. Sometimes the only way to belong is to do the work even when no one is watching.